Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the battleground state of Georgia. Yes, you heard me correctly, Georgia, which I believe stands to be one of the few states from the 2024 election that actually stood out as being more for the Democratic Party than I really expected, especially given the remainder of the results we have seen in the surrounding battleground states. On the national map here, Kamala Harris lost 7 out of the 7 battleground states: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. 6 out of the 7 had voted for Joe Biden in the last presidential election, including the state of Georgia, a state that Joe Biden won by roughly 0.23%. Looking at the 2024 election, though, Georgia stands out to me. Not as a state that flipped from being blue to red, but rather as a state that, compared to the national average, saw one of the most minimal shifts in a way that is quite surprising for a state like itself. Wisconsin and Georgia both share the characterization about being states where the national map didn't reflect itself in the statewide shift. Overall, Donald Trump won the national popular vote by roughly 1.5%. In 2020, Joe Biden won the national popular vote by roughly 5%. This is roughly a 6 to 6.5 point shift on the national landscape. But Wisconsin, Georgia only shifted slightly towards the right. And the reason I separate Wisconsin from Georgia is because Wisconsin has historically always been a close state. When you take a look at its historical voting record, it actually isn't too strong for Democrats. In the 21st century, Georgia has been a state that was pretty overwhelmingly in favor of the GOP. George Bush won it in 2000 by 12 points. In 2004, he won it by 17. Even John McCain won it by 5, then Romney won it by 8. But looking at Wisconsin, barring the Obama years, it has always been close. Wisconsin went to Al Gore by less than 1/4 percentage point. In the state of Wisconsin, we saw that John Kerry won by less than 0.4%, less than half a percentage point. Yes, Obama had some pretty notable victories, but then in 2016, Trump won it by less than a point, Biden won it by less than a point, and then again, Trump won it by less than a point. Wisconsin is always a competitive state, but Georgia didn't always have to be a competitive state, and it wasn't always a competitive state. In 2016, Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in this state by 5.1%, and then the next election cycle, Joe Biden was winning the state. But Donald Trump, unlike many of the states that he was able to flip back into his column, namely Michigan and Pennsylvania and Arizona, all of which voted more in favor of Trump in 2024 than they did in 2016, Georgia was the only anomaly. Wisconsin, you could even throw into that bunch. Because Trump won Arizona by 3.5. This time, he won it by 5. He won Wisconsin by 0.7. This time, he won it by 0.9. He won Michigan by less than a point. This time, he wins by more than a point. And Pennsylvania, he won by less than a point. This time, he wins by nearly 2. But in Georgia, Donald Trump won, I just showed you, by 5.1%. But this time around, voted for him by 2. And a lot of this can be explained by the shift map here. You can see that there's a lot of red on this map. This takes, on a county-by-county basis, how it voted relative to the 2020 election. And in areas like the Rust Belt, there's a lot of red. In the Sun Belt, there's a lot of red. Arguably, across the nation, there's a lot of red, but you don't really see that many blue pockets. But take a look at Georgia. It stands out, doesn't it? Why? Because in the Atlanta metro area, you're finding that a lot of these counties, shockingly compared to the rest of the state, shifted 9 points more Democratic. 7 points more Democratic, 6 points more Democratic. It balanced out the state from what did see a lot of shifts to the right. But in the population center, about 67% of the state of Georgia lives in this region that I'm circling. 2/3 shifted towards the left. The reason I point this out is because as a state that shifted about, we can actually see here, that's a great thing about this website, map.jacksonjew.com, if you want to check it out, shifted 2.4% to the right. The national map, remember, shifted by 6. That is a 3.5 point underperformance in Georgia. And Republicans did see underperformances in states like Michigan, but Michigan shifted by 4. Pennsylvania shifted by 3. North Carolina even shifted by 2, even though Donald Trump won the state in 2020, so Democrats really didn't see this as a major loss. Arizona shifted by 6. Nevada shifted by 6. Massive, massive shifts. And arguably no state shifted to the left, right? The closest we got was Washington, which shifted by just a point to Donald Trump, and only one electoral vote shifted in favor of Kamala Harris, and that was Nebraska's first district. But Georgia stands out, especially with the circumstances of the 2026 midterm elections. Wisconsin has always been that state within reach, and we did see Democrats really turn out the vote in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. Or I just said Wisconsin twice, but in the Supreme Court race in April, Democrats won that race by roughly 10 points. But it wasn't necessarily on an issue of persuasion more so than it was on an issue of turnout. Georgia, though, is unique because Democrats right now have the governorship in Wisconsin. Again, as a, decades-long swing state, Georgia is new to this. A real swing state in 2020 and again in 2024. Wisconsin has had it all for 30 years. What Georgia right now has is a Republican-controlled legislature, a Republican governor, Republican control on almost every aspect of the statewide level, state auditor, right? You could go down to really any lands commissioner, right? You're finding that Republicans hold all of the power in Georgia. So it's interesting, Secretary of State, I'm done going on, but point is, Georgia in 2026 is a unique opportunity for Democrats. And we can see easily why. Because in 2022, you'll see that Georgia was also on the radar for Democrats, but Brian Kemp was uniquely popular. But 2026 might turn around, and we don't know what's going to happen. You see, taking a look at what might happen is that Republicans don't have stellar candidates. Chris Carr can run as Attorney General. But given its national vote in 2024, if just the national results shift in favor of the Democratic Party, let's say by 3 points, Georgia goes back to being its 2020 self of a blue state. It goes back to being, if anything more than that, a margin in which Democrats have not enjoyed in Georgia, barring special elections and runoff elections and circumstances that have largely in the past been out of their control. 22, the Dobbs decision benefited Democrats, but that wasn't of their own making. Sure, Raphael Warnock ran a very strong campaign, and Herschel Walker was just a very, flawed candidate. But Georgia is interesting. Georgia, unlike Arizona, both of which have been largely shifting in unison. You could have seen that in the past if you were comparing 2012 to 2016. Georgia shifted by 3, Arizona by 6 in some ways, right? Georgia and Arizona were outpacing each other back and forth. And now, Georgia very much is far better for Democrats than Arizona compared to the last election, but both of which are within reach in 2026. But that is all to say that in 2028, Wisconsin is a bit more tricky, especially I think with J.D. Vance on the ticket for the GOP, assuming that happens. But Georgia very well could go back to the Democratic Party. Because if Democrats were to just shift this national map by 2 points, there it is. Georgia goes blue. There it is. Wisconsin goes blue too. But it doesn't necessarily, based on the shift. Not all of these states. Arizona stays red. Nevada stays red. North Carolina stays red. Right? So all these states, in many cases, would stay for the GOP, would stay for whichever nominee there is in 2028. But Georgia and Wisconsin are there. But Georgia is unique because it has been trending left every single election, including 2024. In terms of the rest of the nation's shift, it has been a leftward trend. That is good news for the Democratic Party, and that is what should put it on its radar for 2026. As Donald Trump's unpopularity starts to decrease, we have to remember that Georgia still voted in a way that is very similarly with the nation. Georgia is a state that Donald Trump won by roughly 2.2%. He won the national popular vote by 1.5%. That's about a point difference between the two. But that also means that if Donald Trump is underwater nationally, chances are he's underwater in Georgia, which means chances are Republicans are at a disadvantage in Georgia in elections that are upcoming and in 2028. All of this has to do with the fact that Georgia and the national popular vote have converged so closely to a point that even in 2020, Republicans could have made the case Georgia is better for us than nationally because Trump is losing nationally by 4.5, but only in Georgia by 0.2. Not anymore. Because if it was to shift with the rest of the nation, which a lot of states did, might I add, you can see, right, New Jersey shifted outside the nation. New Jersey by 10, New York by 11, right? Illinois by 6, California by 9, Texas by 8, Florida by 10, right? Massive shifts. Georgia was largely immune. And it isn't immune in a way that there are states where nobody really touched, right? Kansas only shifted by 1.5. Okay. Well, that matters, but it doesn't really matter. Wyoming only shifted by 2.4, but these are safe Republican states. Georgia is a swing state. And relative to the rest of the nation, Democrats should be impressed that it didn't go further to Donald Trump, given the context of it all. In the moment, it's bad, right? Republicans won this election. No other way to cut it. But doing an autopsy on it, where are the silver linings here? Georgia is one of them. Where are the potential opportunities for future improvement and future victories? Georgia is one of them. And it will be a state that I think will be at the prime focus of 2026 if Brian Kemp runs for Senate. And should Brian Kemp lose to Jon Ossoff as a popular two-time elected Republican governor, that will really show the true color of Georgia. Because what I think 2024 did was built this narrative, and rightful narrative, that Donald Trump did well in all of these swing states, because he did. First Republican to win the popular vote in 20 years. You can't take that away from him. But what you can do is scrutinize the extent at which Donald Trump won in some of these states. Because outperforming 2016 is impressive. Kudos to the Trump team, right? In that circumstance, if you're looking at it strictly from there, in Arizona, in Nevada, but I wouldn't necessarily argue Georgia. Because that's the state that's going to be the stickler for the Republican Party, and they know it. That's why they're passing those laws to make it more difficult to vote in areas like Fulton County that are very clearly Democratic hotspots. Why they're making it more difficult through all of these laws, in essence, to try to change the results before they even come in. And not to say this to be someone who's trying to peddle conspiracy theory. These laws are written into law, and you can see the direct impact of laws that even in off-the-record conversations you can find when they leak are largely seen as tools of suppressing the vote. You will find that Georgia is a state Republicans are worried about, the Democrats are optimistic about, and the 2024 election results, although it voted for Trump, can reveal exactly why. So take a close look at Georgia. Watch it over the next few years. It'll be very interesting to see how it ends up, especially in 2026 and 2028. Really excited to see the future of that state and many of the other swing states. But right now, I think that Georgia is one of those prime states that are really on track if Democrats do everything correctly for the next 3 years, which is saying a lot, but it's possible. Georgia would be one of the first states to flip on election night in 2028, and it should be a prime target for the future of Democratic governance in the South as a beacon for the Democratic Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2028 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.